Now, from Ontario, we have political commentator Jason Unruhe. Jason, good to have you with us. How do you make an assessment of the situation on the ground? What's happening in Iran now?
Well, I think it's very clear that the people of Iran right now are fed up with the agent provocateurs that are coming into the country. Many of them who are already there, but are just merely acting on their behalf and causing acts of violence against the Iranian state and the Iranian people. The people who came out to protest with legitimate grievances don't want this violence to mar their country and to mar their image around the world. All they had were simple reforms that they want to ask. They weren't asking for the government to be completely overthrown and there to be some kind of quasi-revolution kind of situation. They just wanted a few things to change that don't really require a huge act of violence. The narrative that we get from the Western media is that simply anytime somebody protests in another country, it means that they want their government overthrown. It's strange. Every time
this is what Washington plans to do, actually, and they simply utter it.
Yeah. It's crazy the way that they interpret these events that are unfolding. I mean, it's very sad to see that these people who are trying to express real problems are being co-opted by, frankly, agents of imperialism, whether they want to believe that they're doing it or not. The groups like, I suspect the MEK are coming in and twisting many of the actions of legitimate protesters, if not adding their own violent acts against the government, because that's the kind of thing that that they've always done. This is their way of being.
Exactly. Well, the U.S., Jason, has been actually publicly interfering in the Iranian domestic affairs, and the Iranians are saying in their slogans that they don't want this and that they loathe it. Still, they called for that Security Council emergency meeting, which was not necessary in the eyes of China, Russia, and some others. And anyway, we saw that the U.S. was kind of further isolated, by doing this. How do you look at this?
Oh, I think that's definitely a symbol from the United States. I mean, this is very simply an internal matter. It's just a matter of protests that are being co-opted by a few violent agents. I mean, this doesn't require a UN Security Council vote. Things like Occupy Wall Street, the protests in Ferguson, the huge riots destroying millions of dollars in property in the U.S., did that require a UN security vote? As people were being killed by the government. These people are only asking for reforms. And when the United States went to the UN Security Council over this, there was rather the reaction by most of the world was simply a political rolling of the eyes. It was so blatantly obvious that this was just a political maneuver. This was a waste of the UN Security Council's time. And the world and most of the UN Security Council is getting fed up with it. The U.S. has been bullying that council since its inception. We just saw recently with the vote around Israel trying to claim Al-Quds as the capital of Jerusalem. The whole world pretty much just said no. We're not interested.
Yeah, 128 countries said no.
Yeah, exactly. And then we saw the same thing with the Security Council now. They wanted this whole big thing. They wanted to make a big deal about a whole radical situation and that something needs to be done. And the rest of the world says this is not the big deal that you're making it out to be. This is just simply protests.
So Jason, what is Washington pursuing? Those countries coming out strongly, like Russia, for instance, in a number of instances, both in terms of Palestine, also regarding the Iranian street riots and that kind of thing. They stood against the U.S. and some others, even France said that they won't agree with that and that they need to negotiate with Iran, the maximum, and that there is no threat to peace and security for an emergency meeting at the Security Council level to be held. So what is it that the U.S. is not seeing? Why is it still pursuing such policies?
Well, it's pursuing this policy because it doesn't want a peaceful relationship with Iran. They want Iran as it is, completely destroyed, if not outright removed and replaced with something that is much more friendly towards its capital interests. And the rest of the world knows this. So the U.S. has to portray Iran as some kind of threat to the world. They have to portray it as like some kind of unstable, violence at any moment kind of dictatorship, in order to justify the hostile foreign policy it is that they want to have towards Iran, where the rest of the world doesn't want this. The rest of the world just says we just want to conduct trade, do fair business like everybody else, let everybody get along, and we can all benefit from a mutually beneficial trade relationship. But it's the U.S. and its conquest of power, spheres of influence, its imperialist expansion, which is much decaying, according to Pentagon reports, to expand that empire. And well, you can't expand an empire on peaceful coexistence. You can only expand it upon giving a justification for a violent military expansion.
Exactly. And let's see, we have images now from the city of Qazvin, big mass of people out there supporting their leader. They say that they are stressing that they are out there on the streets to support their leader, to support the Islamic establishment. They also thank the Iranian police force, the army and IRGC for restoring order. They're saying that they do not want to see unrest in Iranian cities anywhere in parts of this country. I wonder if we have Alexander still with us. Well, this is the 5th consecutive day we're witness to similar scenes as you see on your screens. Crowds of people in the streets. These are images live from Qazvin. Well, every day in the course of the past week, Iranians in different cities have been taken out to the streets, and they have condemned any kind of violent protests. They have also among their slogans that they shouted, they also refer to the fact that they do not want any kind of foreign interference in their internal affairs. They ask the U.S. to leave them alone. And also they reiterate the fact that they are there to support their leaders, to support the Islamic establishment. So we have images from Qazvin, from elsewhere, from Mashhad, where the originally start from Mahabad, actually. Well, Jason, are you there? I wonder if we have our political commentator from Ontario, Jason Unruhe. Well,
yes, I'm here.
Good. Jason, the Iranian intelligence ministry has also made a mention of, speaking of foreign interference, they have also mentioned such names as Saudi Arabia and Israel in addition to Washington, the U.S. administration. What do you have to tell us about that?
Well, I would not be surprised at all. If there was something like this going down anywhere in the Middle East, you would probably see the claw of Saudi Arabia inching its way in somehow, somewhere. It's no secret that Iran and Saudi Arabia are not on the same page. Both of them have different interests in the region. Iran has concern for the Palestinian people that are being genocided by Israel, and Saudi Arabia seems to not care about their Muslim brothers at all. So anytime there is a situation like this where there is some kind of hostility or something where something is definitely afoot from foreign interference, Saudi Arabia is, of course, right there behind it, usually not very far away. It's something that Saudi Arabia would definitely like to see is Iran overthrown and have a pro-Western government installed in its place. This is something that Saudi Arabia has been pushing for a very long time, and it's something that one of the big things that they agree with the U.S. and Israel on is getting rid of one of the last holdouts against U.S. imperialism in the Middle East, and that strongest point is, of course, Iran itself. So I would think that it would be almost facetious not to think that Saudi Arabia had some hand in this.
Yeah, that was exactly my question. I was going to ask what Saudi Arabia could be pursuing that you answer. Also, Israel, what's in it for Israel?
Well, Israel is holding in the pocket of the United States. It's their greatest ally in the region. If there would be anybody who would be a counter to that power, it would be Iran. Iran has been very adamant about defending the rights of the Palestinian people, as Israel has been killing them for absolute decades. One of the strongest the stronghold of support for Palestine in the Middle East has been Iran, which, of course, the existence of Palestine is a challenge to the alleged legitimacy of Israel. And getting rid of any large, powerful voice like Iran would be something that would help the development of the supposed legitimacy of Israel itself.
All right, thank you for your comments, Jason Unruhe, joining me from Ontario. So we have these images from different cities across the country with people out there in force in support of the Islamic establishment. In a couple of minutes, my colleague Bardia will take over and continue with the live coverage.
شعار ملت دارالعبادیه است. قلب ایران حسینیه ایران. دور قبور شهدا حلقه زدید. این شهدا لحظه جون دادن صدای یا حسین و یا زهراشون به آسمان بلند بود. همه با هم لبیک یا خامنه ای، لبیک یا حسین است. لبیک یا خامنه ای، لبیک یا حسین است. لبیک یا خامنه ای، لبیک یا حسین است. مرگ بر ضد ولایت فقیه. مرگ بر ضد ولایت فقیه. انشاءالله 3 مرتبه کوبنده قرا لبیک یا حسین رو که من تکرار کردم تکرار میکنید و بعد جناب آیزاره قطعنامه رو میخونن. به بندهای قطعنامه که رسیدن این بارش باران هم عنایت خداست. وقتی شما ذکر بر لب دارید خداوند رحمتش رو بر ما نازل میکند. همین جای دعا بکنیم خدایا باران رحمتت را به حق حضرت زهرا بر ما نازل بفرما. خدایا این کویر تشنه را از باران رحمتت و نزولات آسمانی سیراب بگردان. من امروز میبینم همه مسئولین آمدن، همه مدیران کل.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is Bardia taking over from my colleague Behruz. We're seeing live images from if I'm correct, 5th day of consecutive demonstrations taking place in various cities across Iran to reaffirm support for the Islamic establishment. If I'm correct, we still have political commentator Mr. Jason Unruhe with us on hand to give us more insight on these demonstrations that we're seeing. Mr. Unruhe, give us your perspective on the continued demonstrations that we're seeing in Tehran. It's day 5 now of these rallies in Tehran and various cities, to be precise.
Yes, I think the Iranian people are very adamant that these protests not be overtaken by outside provocateurs who are looking to hijack their legitimate grievances and back it and try to piggyback on their own kind of foreign interference style rhetoric, almost like a desire to overthrow the government kind of situation. And I think that had this been left to just be the regular complaints that, you know, anybody would have about any country, things could have been very peaceful. They could have been very fine. There could have been some kind of common ground. Concessions could have been made. Problems could have been fixed. But because these provocateurs have come in, have created active violence, have caused people to die, have done everything that it is that the Iranian people don't want, it's now turning into a protest and a counter-protest, and it's become much more chaotic than it needed to be. This was just very simple grievances that could have been addressed, that were fair, that were reasonable, and they've been hijacked by these. I can't think of any word to use other than agent provocateurs who are coming in and trying to manipulate events towards some kind of this looks very much like the pattern of the color revolution that the United States, Israel, the UK, and Saudi Arabia collectively have used in many countries in the past several years, from Libya to Bahrain to all kinds of countries across the Middle East. So first they find some kind of legitimate grievance that somebody has, then they send in a whole ton of agents to just completely take it over, blow it massively out of proportion, take it from some simple reform to demanding, frankly, a whole new world over what were just small, simple grievances.
Well, talking about blowing all of this out of proportion, we'll have to look at the session that was forced by that was called for by the United States at the United Nations Security Council, where they called for an emergency meeting on the recent protests in Iran. Let's talk about that. All of the major players, of course, censured the U.S. for even proposing that at the United Nations Security Council.
Oh, yeah, proposing something for the UN Security Council on this is ridiculous. This is a small internal protest matter. This doesn't require the interference or even really the attention of the global military powers to come in and have a say something. This is a very small event. I mean, we've seen things 10 times the size in the United States with Occupy Wall Street, with Black Lives Matter, which was a protest over the killings of Black Americans, where these were very just simple economic reforms. I mean, this is the kind of thing that's really the UN Security Council wasn't created for. They were intended for, threats to security. People legitimately protesting are not a threat to security. If anything, it is the U.S.-backed forces inside of the country that are causing the acts of violence that would be something to be concerned about in terms of security.
One of the clear messages that we've been seeing from these demonstrations is that it was an interesting comment that our correspondent, who we spoke to a few days earlier, who was out at one of these rallies, stated that if this is an Iranian problem, there will be an Iranian solution. A clear message from these rallies is a definitive and strong no to any form of foreign intervention in Iran's domestic affairs.
Oh, definitely. This is not their world to take, and the United States has a very long-standing belief that it is their divine right under the a phenomenon that's usually described as American exceptionalism, that if anything happens anywhere in the world, it's their business, like they are the parent or some kind of daddy that has the right to stand over everyone else and dictate to them what freedom and democracy is supposed to be. But really, they have no right to do so. Not only that, they have no moral ground on which to stand to do these things, while they have been the greatest threat to freedom and democracy around the world. How can they speak of, well, we're concerned about the Iranian people, when they just murdered 3 million people in Iraq and Afghanistan based on lies? They have no grounds by which to say. They have no moral ground which to stand on. If anything, they should be some of the last people to say anything whatsoever. I mean, just on their own record, never mind their alliance to Saudi Arabia, which is one of the most horrible governments in the entire world, one of the greatest human rights abusers that's existed in the modern world.
We also have to look back at their comments coming from the likes of Donald Trump and the Prime Minister of the Israeli regime, Benjamin Netanyahu, when these demonstrations and protests initially started in Iran. They were quick to, as ever opportunistic as they are, they were quick to jump on it and make various comments. The U.S. president, for his part, stated that he's supporting the people of Iran. How can he be supporting the people of Iran when just a few weeks back he called the Iranian nation a quote-unquote terrorist nation like few others?
Well, frankly, he can't. I mean, his words ring about as hollow as any words could ever be. If he really cared about the people of Iran, then why would he place such ridiculous sanctions on the country for, frankly, having done nothing wrong? It's simply, this is complete opportunism at its absolute worst. One almost feels as though someone just gave him a notice that said this was going on, and he just walked out to a press conference and said so. There's no real concern on behalf of the United States for the people of Iran. If they did, they would be trying to help them, instead of constantly trying to sabotage the economy, which mostly hurts, the lower classes within society. Much of the economic problems that are going on in Iran right now that people are legitimately upset about are problems that have arisen as a result of the economic sabotage that the United States itself has carried out. It's mind-boggling that anybody would really believe the United States in this situation, that they care. They do not care. As I stated previously, if they really did care, would they have killed the 1.5 million people in Afghanistan and Iraq based on lies? That they would not. And we're supposed to believe that all of a sudden they care about the people of Iran? I mean, it's ridiculous. This is the same formula that they're using inside of Venezuela. They claim that they care about the people of Venezuela, yet they send in agent provocateurs to kill people. They place sanctions which try to collapse the economy. It is opportunism at its finest. The United States has frankly never cared about Iran in any way, shape, or form.
And then there's the comments made by the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Some commentators are stating that that's truly a clear example of a wolf in sheep's clothing.
Oh, that's definitely it. If there was ever a wolf in sheep's clothing, it would certainly have been Benjamin Netanyahu. I don't know what on any basis anybody could claim that Israel cares about anyone. The whole foundation of the country is based on the genocide of people. Netanyahu has one of the largest, two faces that, politics has ever seen. He's one of the biggest liars on the face of the planet. To say that Israel cares about anybody is so absurd. One would have to be of a questionable mental state in order to believe him. They would have to be willfully ignorant of the crimes that Israel has committed. And of course, this is as the United States carries out this kind of aggression, this kind of manipulation of Iranian society. There's Israel, as usual, like clockwork, right behind them, supporting them all the way in their in their imperialist expansions. I don't think it's unreasonable at all to acknowledge that Israel is a part of U.S. imperialism. They are as very much a tool of them. They are used to carry out the policy, and they are beneficiaries of that imperialism as well. They are fed land that is stolen from Palestinians, that's stolen from Syria. They benefit when the U.S. expands its spheres of influence. When it comes into a country and it steals the resources, Israel is one of the biggest beneficiaries of that. So, of course, this would be completely hollow and meaningless words coming out of Netanyahu.
And of course, going back to the UN Security Council session on what took place in Iran, a guest that we spoke to also a few days ago said that reeks of weakness from the United States, as the Trump administration is just trying to scrap for crumbs at this point.
Yes, it very much is. I mean, they can come out and say anything they want about the situation in Iran, and I'm sure many of the American people will believe them. But the international community is sitting back and, as I said earlier, rolling their eyes at this because of the nonsense coming out of the United States. Now, normally, they can manipulate the opinion with a mass control of media, but the world isn't falling for it this time. The hope was to try to get a UN Security Council ruling on this, or some kind of official statement to try to give a legitimacy to the narrative that the United States is trying to push on the situation in Iran. And frankly, it didn't work. The rest of the world, the rest of the UN Security Council simply just tired of it. They no doubt felt that it was a waste of their time. The events in Iran are not what the UN Security Council was intended for. They were intended to deal with security threats, not in internal domestic disputes.
That's right. So for those of you just joining us, people have turned out on the streets in various cities across Iran for a fifth consecutive day to express support for the Islamic establishment and denounce the violence that was staged in recent protests. I'd like to get a closing statement from our guest, Mr. Jason Unruhe. Sir, we're going to wrap up the program at this point. Any closing statements and comments you'd like to add?
I would definitely like to add that the United States needs to immediately back off from this situation and allow the people of Iran to decide their own fate. If they have grievances with their own government, let them deal with those grievances. If the United States wants to be such a great beacon of freedom and democracy around the world, then why don't they back off and let people solve those things? Let them be, a democratic country and allow them to actually deal with their own internal issues without interfering with them. And how democratic is it when you do that?
Thank you very much, sir. Jason Unruhe, political commentator, joining us here on Press TV for this segment of the program, where once again people have turned out on the streets in separate cities across Iran for a fifth straight day to express support for the Islamic establishment and denounce the violence that was staged in recent protests. We saw the rallies taking place yesterday. That's on Saturday, where cities of Tehran, Sari, Amol, and Semnan in the north, Elam in the west, Kerman in the south, they shouted slogans and carried placards condemning violence and sedition and expressing their support for the Islamic establishment. Thousands are estimated to have taken part in these demonstrations. Today, day 5 of these demonstrations, we also saw similar rallies taking place in Mahabad, in Qazvin, Shahrekord, various other cities as well. According to our website, last week Iran witnessed peaceful protests against recent price hikes and the overall economic condition of the country. However, limited numbers of violent individuals, some of them armed, sought to turn the peaceful protests into street riots. According to officials, some rioters used shotguns and pistols to attack police and fire at the crowds of protesters. The administration of President Hassan Rouhani also acknowledged the general public's right to protest and convey their demands through peaceful means, but said any protest has to obtain legal permits and be peacefully staged. The administration also undertook to address the economic difficulties as well. However, we've been seeing these nationwide rallies taking place in support of the Islamic establishment. Following those events, these rallies have one message, and that one message is, first of all, if there is an Iranian problem, there will be an Iranian solution. This is an internal matter for Iran, and a big no to any form of foreign intervention and foreign meddling in Iran's internal affairs.
It's one of the bleakest scenes of man-made destruction in the forests of Canada.
They feel because they have a majority that they have a mandate to do whatever they want.
And our homeland is being threatened by major corporations from around the world who come into this area and easily exploit and extract our natural resources.
Once again, human greed is destroying the world for a few dollars more.
God becomes the almighty dollar. The dollar becomes the God. And that's what the problem is.
Something has to be done.